Welcome to the Lost and Found podcast. I'm your host, Amanda. Join me each week as I rediscover my life's meaning, my passions, and my place in this world after leaving behind the only dream I've ever known. If you are dealing with self-loss, identity changes, career transitions, or you are still trying to figure out your life's purpose, then you're not alone. Join me. Wanderers are always welcome. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Lost and Found. This is your host, Amanda. I am so excited. We've got such a good setup for today, and we have a great guest, and I think you're going to gain so much out of this. Oh, that's Dirks. My dog is here. I didn't warn you about that beforehand. Yep, I'll edit that out later. But I love him. He likes to do big protect, as my brother says. Anyway, getting back to the point of the show, let me introduce our guest. Alyssa Scarano is a licensed professional counselor, and she has been the founder and owner of her very own therapy group called the Collective Therapy and Wellness. She is known for her empathetic and compassionate approach. Alyssa specializes in relationships, and she's dedicated to helping individuals heal from childhood trauma, break generational patterns, create meaningful and authentic connections. And she teaches that by first helping people foster compassionate relationships with themselves. So, Alyssa, thank you so much for being on the show. I am so excited to have you here. I can't wait to pick your brain about everything.
Well, I'm excited to be here too. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. A lot of what I've been reading about your work and about your business, a lot of it's really deeply rooted in empathy and connection. And many of my listeners are either missing that in their lives or they've had it, but they've lost it and they want to get it back. So I'm really excited to dive into everything that you specialize in and what you could offer for this show. Could you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what exactly it is that encouraged you to become a counselor and what shaped you early on into this path?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I really had no idea what I wanted to do, and you're tasked with that at a very young age. You're supposed to just have it figured out. And I was always very into art. I thought that I was going to do something in the field of art, whether it was graphic design. I actually went to art school, right outside of high school. And I really wasn't sure. And I got there, and it just felt empty. It wasn't enough, really, for me. And I've always wanted to inspire people. I wanted to be a source of inspiration for people. And when I got to art school, it was really kind of empty. It wasn't enough. I wasn't really motivated to be there. I found all these reasons not to be there. And so naturally, I left and I went to community college back home and I majored in English writing, actually. I wound up being really drawn to it, specifically in terms of like character development or story arc. And I realized how much I loved words because there's so much weight to them and they mean a lot. And the words that we choose to just describe our daily life or who we are matter because there's so much meaning attached to them. Why we choose the words that we choose, when we describe ourselves or what it is that we're facing. From there, I decided I wanted to get into psychology and I minored in psychology. I loved the idea of when reading a book or a piece of writing that, the idea of the narrator, where did the story come from? Why did this specific detail stick out to the writer or the character that made it so important? And I liked even the idea of like an honest or dishonest narrator. Even a dishonest narrator, that's their truth for whatever reason. And I fell in love with writing because it was an opportunity for me to finally use my voice. Growing up, I never really felt comfortable to speak my mind and to say what my truth was. And from there, as I feel like I think a lot of therapists, find in their journey, it starts with your own healing and going to therapy and finding the words that tell my story and a space where I could speak and speak freely. And I wanted to give back what it did for me. And it really encapsulated a lot of my different passions in a lot of ways. So that's really, I think, how it all developed. And then specializing in relationships, I remember being in grad school and I had to take family counseling. And I was like, I'm never going to be a family therapist. Like, I don't want to even take this class.
Yeah.
And then after grad school, one of my first jobs was family therapy, and I just fell in love with it. And I realized how much of our family of origin really shapes our worldview of ourselves and of other people. And so I take that experience in with me in the work that I do today, even though I'm not really doing family work. I'm always working with family of origin. And it's really one of my favorite things to do and to help people rewrite their stories or even just find the words or accept their stories and have more fulfilling relationships in their life.
I'm sitting here going, I felt that, I felt that, I felt that the 2 years ago. So, like, short background on the podcast. I used to work in national security, and then when I left that career, I thought that that was what I was supposed to do for like all my life, and I came out of that and realized I had such a regimented identity, and when that was gone, everything was so free flowing and weird and overwhelming because there was so much opportunity and kind of choice in front of me, and I didn't really know what kind of direction to go in, and I didn't understand what I was feeling. Like I was frustrated at some points, I was sad at some points, I was angry or I was relieved, and the only thing that actually helped me put use the power of words to help me get that out and like emotionally start to deal with what I was feeling was through the podcast. So I love that you've found a way to use the creative writing aspect to not only heal what you were thinking and feeling about your own life at that time and what you thought your purpose was supposed to be, and it switched for you. And now it's an outlet that you can teach your clients to use to help give them power because you are so right. And the person that understands how powerful their words are is the one that's going to be able to change other people's lives. And I have kind of thought about that for years now, that not only does the power of my words impact someone else, the power of my words impacts what I think about myself and how successful I could become. And that is something I definitely have to work on a daily basis. Like I I'm not perfect. I have no idea what I'm doing, but every single time I tear myself down, it's going to prevent me from being able to move forward or do the things that I do want to do, and I have to work on that. So I think that's amazing that you were able to incorporate it. So tell us a little bit more about your company and your therapy groups that you work with and that you lead. You know, what kind of originally encouraged you to become the counselor, and what kind of services do you offer? Because you're also a yoga instructor, right? Or is that not part of it? Or I'm really curious, how does it all flow together and what you specialize in?
Yeah, so I really honestly always had this vision for the practice. I always wanted to open up. I used to see it as like a clinic or an agency type of setting that incorporated the whole person, right?
Hmm.
Mind, body, spirit into healing. I almost saw it as like a one-stop shop, right? Where you can come and you can, yeah, capture yoga class after therapy. Or you can to help integrate some of what you're maybe learning or practicing, or even just working through in therapy and on your mat. And then the aspects of like self love that you can develop through connecting with yourself, even in pain, even in some really difficult emotions and processing trauma, and then practicing other skills that can just continue to foster that self love and self compassion, whether it was through nutrition or meditation or mindfulness, tapping into your own personal power. And I think what we see in the mental health field is everything is clinically focused, right, on insurance and medical necessity and on diagnosis, but it leaves the whole other part of what it is to be human out and what our personal power is in our own lives. And so I've always wanted to create a place like that, a solace for people to feel like they
Yeah.
belong, they can be accepted. And then, life happens and stuff. And I always thought it would be something I would get to one day. But then as it does, as life happens, back against the wall. And we had, our son, and he was diagnosed with autism at 16 months old. And I just couldn't go back to a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, working for someone else because he had a lot of needs. I needed to be there for him and to help him. And, it was almost like that now or never. I'm either going to do it now or never going to do it. And I can't not go back to work. I need to see
Right.
my family. I would be so empty without this. This is my passion. It's what fuels me and helps me feel less alone is being there for other people in their times of pain. So, um, it was now or never. And the mission behind the collective was always, like I said, to be this sense of solace for people, even if it's virtual, that I can be a sense of support or presence for them in some really dark or heavy or challenging things that they're experiencing in their lives. And then we do have our coaches, which are all like wellness trained practitioners, registered yoga teachers. We have a licensed clinical social worker on staff who's created a whole self-love program that's backed by psychology. And everything is offered, at different tiers. Our current clients, anyone who comes to us as a therapy client, gets access to those coaching or some of those coaching programs or offerings
Oh,
at no
that's really
additional
cool.
cost. Yeah, to try and again, like even though it's virtual, we don't have a brick and mortar location, and we are multi-state, which is also really great. We can service a lot of different people in different areas, and we accept insurance, and so we try to be accessible in that way, and help people really get that whole person holistic treatment that can help them. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and a lot of what I try to do, I think, even as the clinical director, the owner of the practice, is to carry some of that value system into just even the clinicians, if we're working as a team. I want that it to also be a solace for them. So but yeah, it has deep roots, I think, just even stemming in my own childhood, wanting to be for others what I maybe didn't have at times in my childhood from other people. So, source of goodness, I guess, is what we're trying to create.
And I love that it's modernized in that way where you could be a virtual client or you could be an in-person client and truly focusing on the whole being of the person, not just their mental health, but their physical health. And I've heard that as sometimes for some clients, particularly for men, being able to speak through therapy can be difficult, but doing something physical helps them talk. So it's a lot of times when my dad wants to say something to my mom, but they haven't really fully had the conversation, she'll offer like, let's go on a walk. We'll take the dog. We'll go around and come back, and he'll open up a little bit more, and it's a little bit easier for him to do that. So I love that you incorporate the physical practice and the emotional stuff to get people to kind of feel like they can be in a safe place and share what they want to share at that time. And it's a healthy way to address all sorts of parts of yourself, right? So I think that's such a unique and great way to offer it, and to be able to help people across state lines. That's phenomenal, right? Because I guess a lot of things modernized when COVID hit and people, you couldn't go in person anymore. So you had to figure out a way, how do I still impact as many people as possible? I don't know. Did you guys run into a lot of issues like that, over the last few years, or has it always been in this kind of style of service?
Yeah, it's always been virtual. Yeah, I mean, there times of COVID and quarantine, like it was so hard. I think on all of us collectively, we've been through a trauma. So the practice really didn't even begin until just a few years ago after
Okay.
COVID, and so we've always started and been virtual. And it's been really great to see how even being a virtual only like practice and offering these things, and people are receptive to it. People do want it, and we are able to create a certain amount of magic even though it's not in person. We've done some in person, like local to like where I'm located, my coaches are located. We've done some in person stuff, but it's still very magical. And it's one of the good things I think that came out of COVID times was that, we've had opportunities to switch to telehealth and bank on some of the or rely on some of the technological benefits of our times. And so it's been helpful. And a lot of clients really are receptive, more receptive into telehealth, believe it or not, than sometimes in person. And in person will always, I think, be desired for sure. But I've seen that with our telehealth option,
Mhm.
people or clients are more open sooner because they're in their comfort of their own home. Yeah, they can sit outside while they're having their session, and then they can participate from any time of day without having to worry about traffic, and take their session then on your lunch hour,
Yeah,
so
yeah. No, I think that that's a great way to approach it. I think you're right. The right attitude to have. I need the client to feel like they're in control of choosing when and where they want to participate, and you're not like pushing it. Like it's a Tuesday at 2:30, you be here at this time, whatever. And if they're living a life right now that's teleworkable, if they're like, me or you, yeah, they want to do it in their sweatpants in their backyard with a glass of iced tea. I don't know.
Yeah.
Where they feel like they can do that. So I think that's great that you're opening up every opportunity for anyone that wanted to come in and seek that help. In some of your therapy sessions, sometimes you guys often talk about breaking generational patterns, or you might be noticing a client that's repeating a habit that they brought up that they used to do or their family used to do, things like that. And I'm curious, what are some common patterns maybe you've identified throughout your practice or your training, and how would you approach changing those negative patterns, and with someone in particular that might be struggling with feeling lost or stuck in their life and they can't figure out how to stop doing that bad thing or that toxic behavior?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, Linda. Thank you so much. This is really, I think, at the core, right, of the work that I do, and I think it's at the core of all of us. There, the things that we're struggling with, um, outwardly in our lives, or even mental health symptoms, they have roots a lot of the time in things that we've gone through in the past. And so, when it comes to breaking some of these generational patterns, I think first and foremost, like if we're going to break it down into like try and simplify it, if it's easy enough, right, is to, I think, first be able to identify what is this pattern that's not serving me? What is the belief, behind this pattern that is just a tape playing over and over in my mind? And getting curious about that pattern. There's a reason that it exists. It was there for a reason. I learned it to protect myself, to keep myself safe, to survive emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically. And in that essence, it's like even if it's led to unhelpful outcomes throughout our lives, we're lucky that we had that. Because if we didn't, then what, right? And so it's something to be respected, and at the same time, gently giving it permission that it doesn't have to be the only like that belief system. And I'll give you an example, but um, I think it's a matter of, getting curious with ourselves first rather than judgmental. And then also inviting in a new perspective. So if we're looking at maybe some more examples or specific examples of generational patterns that get passed down, we can see them sometimes as trying to avoid conflict for the goal of keeping a peace, or love being conditional or achievement based, right? If I'm performing well in some area of my life, then I'm loved. Emotional suppression, right? Because having emotions was seen as bad, wrong, or weak. So those patterns, yeah, they start in our family of origin, but they might have even been passed down from our parents' parents. So the stresses of the different generations have an influence here. We see in older generations is that it's all about survival. I don't have time for emotions. We don't have time to sit and so pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Just keep moving. Like it is what it is.
Bury it deep. Yeah.
Yeah. Or sometimes we see it as be a good little girl or a good little boy, stop complaining, stay quiet, stay small. You're supposed to listen and be seen and not heard, right? Some of those like belief systems that we've heard described in different generations, but they still carry on today, just in different maybe intensities or in different shades. And so, when we look at maybe some of the challenges that we might be experiencing, whether it's, you know, stressing about making the right decision as if there's a wrong decision to make. Well, because there's some sort of fear around who I am deep down, if I get it wrong, I won't be loved, I won't be accepted, I'm bad. And so recognizing what's driving some of that behavior and what belief system or what pattern, and giving it a little bit of a nod in terms of like, okay, thank you for getting me through that back then, right? I needed to be the good little boy or the good little boys, good little girl, so that I was able to fit in my family. And that little belief system as a little kid helped me achieve that, maybe, right? But it's also not serving me, or perhaps it wasn't serving me for a long time, but it was all I had back then. And that was the story then. But what new narrative is actually more of an absolute or universal truth, which is that I always deserve love, regardless of achievement, regardless of if I said something or did something that upset somebody else, I deserved it then and I deserve it now. And it's about inviting that in. And those are just some examples because if we look back at our family of origin, right, sometimes we tend to carry it out like some of the same roles that our parents played. So perhaps mom was hyper independent and didn't ask for help from dad. And so as you become a mom, like maybe that same thing is carrying on now, right? Because what? Because what belief system has a influence there, has an influence there?
I like that you gave such a variety of options of negative thoughts or negative beliefs that we might have about ourselves, because you may not even realize that that's what that belief is. You're just acting in a way where that's coming out physically or actually manifesting in your life or in your relationships. And you may not realize, oh, that that thing that happened way back when, or that one phrase that my dad said that one time stuck with me forever. And that's how I've operated or chose to create my life, was based around this belief or whatever. And you may not even realize that that's the story that you're telling yourself, or that's the cognitive script that you're following. And you started listing a few off, and I'm kind of like, oh, I bet I have one of those actually. And it might be explaining why I don't have confidence in this type of situation, or I might feel like an imposter in this type of situation, or that might be why that relationship failed, was because I had that particular belief about either myself or my partner, and it manifested in the wrong way to make it unable to work, you know? So I like that you had such a variety of choice there. Did you realize at all, going through your training or by starting your business, that you had a negative belief or a limiting belief about yourself? And how did you turn that around or change your mindset to address it?
Yeah, and I think we all have a bunch, and sometimes we don't even know it until life rubs up against something and we see a consequence or an outcome that's like really against what we deeply believe or wanted or hoped for. And so I know that in the past it was very much like, be a good girl, don't upset anybody, just do what you're told. And that turned into, and the interesting part is like me as a person, I'm generally speaking gonna call things out as I see them, right? And that was kind of frowned upon growing up. Don't make any noise, don't cause a fight. And in that sense, I didn't really have, I think, a space to practice using my words, to be assertive, and to also be okay with whatever the outcome is. Because sometimes we do need to stick up for ourselves, or there's an aspect of I have something to say here. So that was one that I learned earlier on in my life. And so it's like whenever I get to do things like this, it's like, wow, kind of acknowledging that little girl that didn't get to do that. So this is really special for me to just be here. I wanted to kind of tell you that, share that with you. And then I think another one, which it's very interesting because I don't want to say that this is like a blanketed kind of thing, but I think when it comes to anger, and I'm like smiling as I say this because it's so common, right? Like the belief that we have about anger. Don't be angry. Like that one is everywhere. It's bad to be angry. Don't be angry. And the truth is like we need anger. We need all of our emotions, but we need anger because that's the fire. That's what fuels the fire for change. That's what fuels the fire for sticking up for yourself, right? And if we don't allow ourselves to have our anger, then we're just going to continue to accept things as they are, or minimize or invalidate. I think there's a difference though, right? Is yes, there's inappropriate ways to respond to anger, but because the learning is always don't be angry, I think a lot of us haven't found ways to know how to respond or deal with our anger. So that's, I think, a big one for me. And I think a lot of what I've seen in the work that I do is that I think it's a big one for a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. The growing up, you're taught, right, that certain emotions are good ones, certain emotions are bad ones, which for a lot of, I guess, young women, at least, you're taught to be the people pleaser. It's the easiest thing to do. You're the caretaker. You're going to raise the family. You're going to do all these what they call the traditional roles or whatever in society these days. And being an angry woman is always seen as a negative. Being an imposition for anyone else, especially making other people uncomfortable around you, you're not supposed to do. And I've actually run into that a couple of times in my life where I've had an emotion, like I've been upset or I've been angry or I've cried trying to explain like to a friend or a person I was with, like, hey, this, I don't know why this happened. I don't know why you did it, but it was really hurtful. And I'm just trying to explain how I felt. And the feedback I would get back from those conversations was, oh, well, I didn't want to talk to you again about these things, or I didn't want to ask you that question again because you got so emotional or you got so upset or things like that. So that would just reinforce to me that me trying to explain how I felt to someone else, even though I wasn't raising my voice, even though I wasn't like accusing them of something, just being visibly upset would make somebody else so uncomfortable. So it's kind of like, okay, so do I not tell the truth about how I feel, or do I have to practice being more emotionally controlled, or do I not care what they think and I still just need to do it? And some kind of trying to figure out which direction I was supposed to pick would paralyze me, because then I wouldn't really be able to make a decision. And then you get in that terrible cycle of living not as your authentic self. And throughout this podcast, I've really realized that by not saying whatever it is that I am actually feeling, and in full honesty, whether it's a good conversation or a difficult, uncomfortable thing to say, like by not saying how I truly feel or emphasizing what I really want and choosing that path, I hurt myself in the long run by not going after what actually feels true or right to me, or going after what I want out of life. And being angry is okay, right? How you exert that anger, very different.
Right.
It happens, but being angry or upset about how something turned out isn't necessarily wrong. Me trying to practice letting it channel through me in a way that I can use that emotion effectively, rather than having it destroy who I am by trying to bury it down, because that's just it's not fair to me, and it's not fair to whatever that relationship was that I'm trying to cultivate there by being dishonest about how I really felt about how things transpired. So I love that you brought up anger. That's especially with trauma too, like so much of that stuff is kind of intertwined, where you're angry about, you're embarrassed that it happened, you're ashamed or humiliated, but you're angry that that person did it to you, or that you allowed it to happen, even though it may or may not have been your fault. Like you hold so much of that and you don't know where to put it, and it can get heavy.
And I think part of it is like it comes from that whole message, right, from society. Don't be angry. When in reality, it's completely justified. You went through something unfair or unjust, right? And deserve space, right, to exist. We all deserve a sense of safety in the world. And when something happens that's unfair, it calls into question, well, how safe am I? How much do I really have?
Well, I'm curious, for the clients that you've been working with who want to rebuild their relationships. Maybe they had some emotional issues or they had a trauma, but they're trying to reconnect with people, or even in society now, we're so connected through the internet, but we've never been more lonely than now, right? The modern day person actually has a really difficult time even creating relationships. Building friendships as an adult is chaos or weird or awkward. Like you can't run up to somebody at Target and be like, "Hey, I like your shoes. You want to go to the playground together?" Like it doesn't work, and
Yeah.
it feels weird and odd. But I'm very curious, how do you approach building relationship connections or repairing connections that maybe were damaged with your clients, and how they need to learn how to connect with themselves first, since that's one of your specialties?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think truthfully, we might have already kind of hinted at this, said this, but everything begins within. So when we find ourselves maybe judging someone else, right, it's because there's already a judgment internally, right, about who I am and about what I believe to be good enough or bad, right? Our level of intimacy can only go as far with others, can only go as far as the level of intimacy we have with ourselves. And so it's actually interesting because if we look at how we're treating other people in our lives, right, almost as like a way to clue ourselves into like what's actually happening internally for ourselves, it's a really good way to hold the mirror up and ask ourselves, well, actually, is this how I feel? It actually, is this what's coming up for me? So, in terms of like, how do we actually do that? How do we actually connect with ourselves. I think it's about not resisting our own emotions and not objecting to having our emotions. The minute that we do that, yeah, we bury it or we minimize it, we invalidate it, we reject or we self abandon. Um, and there's no way that we can really truly connect with, truly connect with ourselves if we're denying parts of ourselves. And I think one of the ways that we can work toward that is by first and foremost, changing the way that we look at emotions. And I love how you said before, like if I suppress, an emotion, like that's not good. I mean, yeah, it's kind of like ignoring your check engine light on your car
Mhm.
and driving through it anyway. And so you drive your car and your motor just dies on you, right? Or you're not getting that oil change, even though your car is signaling to you like, hey, change my oil. Eventually your engine is just gonna not work, not turn on. And emotions very much work the same way. They're always there communicating something with us. And if we change the way that we view our emotions as either good or bad, but more as like these signals that, hey, you need something and you need something that you're not getting, or it's time to check in. Um, then we have more control over our lives. We have more control over ourselves, even though it feels maybe at first with those really hard emotions that they feel really chaotic or overwhelming. So changing the way that we look at our emotions so that we can have all of them and then meeting ourselves with grace and compassion and kindness because life is hard. Being human is
Yeah.
hard. And
It's the worst, actually.
oh my
Sorry.
gosh.
The bane of human existence is that we have to exist and make those choices about our lives, right? And it's not an easy thing to do.
No, and then couple that with, like, just the stress of our world, right? With, like, health insurance and trying to pay our bills and the prices of eggs. I mean, it's gonna be
Oh my
really hard.
yes, definitely addressing your stress. And I don't know if you guys talk about this much in your practice or not, but sometimes I've noticed if I'm feeling really stressed, I have like a physical pain somewhere. And that's kind of where I notice it first. Like my body will start screaming out before I might mentally acknowledge that something is wrong, right? And then I have to address the body, and it's more so that's a symptom versus the true getting at the root of what's really bothering me. And then once I kind of find the way to get at that root, then it goes, oh, okay. And like I can unclench, or that muscle relaxes, or that pain can go away. But it's so connected for how stress will manifest on you physically, emotionally, mentally, and ignoring it ignoring it doesn't fix it. That's what I've learned in 34 years. It really won't. For anybody that might be listening right now who's not had the opportunity to work with you or anything like that, what could be maybe some homework that they could do tonight after listening to this episode? Is there anything in particular they need to ask themselves or that they should try at home or practice doing if they were trying to build better relationships?
Yeah, so I think checking in first with yourself. I know we all know these sayings, right? Self-care is not selfish, and put your oxygen mask on before anyone else's. And we know them, we hear them every day, but in practice, it's so easy to forget. And because we're in the thick of it, you can't see the forest through the trees. So I think it is not just like during times of stress to do this, but like taking time to notice, like, and be curious. I think, and even if the response to like, okay, being curious with what's going on within yourself, within your mind, within your body, within the way that you're feeling, and actually like responding to that instead of trying to figure it out or judging it or labeling it, just saying, that's interesting. And just noticing it, right? I think is first and foremost. And then the second thing is like asking yourself, what is this emotion trying to tell me about what I need? That's a way to start. And perhaps the answer to that is like, I don't know. And even that is okay. Well, that's interesting. Maybe I should think on that. Maybe I should And we've got the answer to everything nowadays, right?
Yeah, well, ChatGPT will be like, I can't afford therapy. You are now my board certified licensed clinical therapist, and you're going to teach me these things. And it's like, yeah, okay, but internal work too, guys. Internal work.
Internal work, but you could Google self-care practices, easy at-home self-care practices, or what can I do to make myself feel better if I feel sad? Like if in those moments you can't necessarily figure out what you need, maybe it's even just a matter of turning something funny on TV, shutting off all the noise and putting a soft light on and just relaxing, if possible. It's not always easy to do.
Yeah. Are there any particular self-care practices that you do that kind of help you feel better if you're feeling off or stressed or out of alignment with what you're supposed to be doing? What do you do that helps bring you back to your path?
For me, my home practice, my yoga practice at home is paramount. Anybody who knows me from, years ago, they would tell you the word that they associate with me is yoga. I have to make my own bed before I get out and start my day and try and help somebody with their stuff. And so for me, it's my at home yoga practice. It's even if it's a matter of like 10 minutes of just being down on my mat and, taking a few deep breaths and just checking in and starting my day that way. That's, and on a good day, that's my number one thing, but also on a really hard day, it's almost a necessity in order to, relax or prepare for tomorrow. The other thing for me, I mean, this is what I do. I'm having conversations all day long. And then my son gets home from school and I'm having conversations and engaged in the moment. And I think it helps that I love people and I love having conversations. But by the end of the day, my ears are just buzzing. So I need that quiet time. And so whenever I do shut my phone off and I'm not on my email, which is hard to do as a business owner, but if I, yeah, and if I'm not, looking at social media reels to kind of brain rot, shutting it all off and appreciating the silence, kind of like if you are in a really loud room and then all of a sudden it goes quiet and you can really appreciate or notice how loud the silence is. Like that is a really interesting and like a nice shit to pay attention to or to notice. And I remember when my son was born, oh my goodness, he would cry when he was awake all day, unless he was sleeping, and he would sleep for very short amount of times, like 45-minute intervals. It was crazy first year of his life for all of us. But when he would sleep, the quiet would be so loud that I could really appreciate it so much more, and things seem to slow down. So those are my two favorite ones. And if I can't, for whatever reason, roll out my mat and practice some yoga, it's always going to be just sitting in the quiet for me. And everybody's different, but that I think is something that I've recognized that I
No, I think those are great ways to recenter yourself, and the overstimulation is so true. I had a previous podcast episode where I talked about my trip to Antarctica and that I had that realization how quiet it is down there, but how loud and deafening the quietness was. Like it's so hard to explain. It's probably the closest thing to like the sensory deprivation that I've ever done. I've never sat in like the salt pods or been in the completely dark room or whatever. So that was the closest thing I've ever come to it, but it is crazy how overstimulated we are constantly. If you're living in a city, there's always traffic or noise, or like here, even in my own house, I have my dog, I have my phone going off, I have 2 different laptops for work, I have people on the podcast, everything's going and constantly happening. Social media is on, I'm watching reels, I'm trying to pay attention to marketing and stay up to date, and it's constant go, 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 go. And it wasn't until I went there that I didn't know how to explain it to anybody else. There's only like 3 colors. There's black, white, and the blue ocean down there, and silence. And it was wild because I kept thinking like this can't be real, but it's deafeningly quiet. I'm glad that you said that, because I was like, oh, I resonate with that too. It'd probably be better if I did yoga and I could get it more, but that was the closest thing I think I've ever come to that, to complete sensory deprivation. And that's really a profound moment to have, because you do get to get so much clarity when there's nothing else distracting you. So I'm glad that you have a practice like that that helps you kind of recenter yourself. And you've mentioned a little bit throughout our conversation so far that like the work that you do is such a privilege that you get to help people get to that kind of place as well and center themselves and understand what they're feeling and thinking and doing. And it can probably get very vulnerable and difficult while they're going through those things, but you are impacting these people's lives every day. And so I'm curious if there was ever a moment in your career as a therapist and counselor where the weight of everything that's been discussed or the weight of everything that your clients are letting go of, does that ever land on you? And do you ever feel that huge sense of responsibility now because you're carrying whatever they just let go of or that trauma? So I'd love to kind of pick your brain about how you view the responsibility that you hold as their counselor and how do you handle that?
Amanda, I love this question because it very much like ties into the way that I practice the work that I do and how I view the relationships I develop with my clients, how I view the change and the growth and healing process. And I love this question because it really is so important too for any even like aspiring therapist or therapists early on in their training, because we're told in grad school very often to different degrees, like separating your experience from your client's experience. But it's not really possible because no matter how you cut it, we are like sponges to each other and to our world. We're going to soak up each other's stuff. And we each have our own sticking points from our own lives, and things are going to stick because there's something sticky in all of us for it to stick to. And I think it's a matter of like developing a way as a clinician, how I've been able to approach this is developing a way to allow myself to feel what my client is feeling, using that to propel therapy forward. And at the same time, being able to step outside of it and being able to discern how much of this belongs to me versus my client. Even so, if it belongs to me, is it usable? Will it be effective to kind of lean on in this moment to resonate with this other person? So if I had to give you a visual, the way that I describe it is I'm not listening to you from outside the cave of your dark experience. I'm actually in the cave with you, in the darkness, feeling the fear, feeling what you're feeling, wearing it, trying it on, but then also getting you to look up, like outside of the cave and see the light and us climbing out together. And perhaps in that process, I'm having to kind of climb out and then climb back in and climb out and climb back in simultaneously. So there's a lot of acrobatics to it. It's actually a lot of work. I'm not just listening or giving advice. I'm actually wearing your experience and envisioning it and feeling it. And it's definitely painful at times, but it's sacred. I've heard some really painful experiences of childhood neglect and abuse. And, I can feel it as if like it was something that happened to me. And in that scenario, I will use that to resonate with my client, to be able to label the emotion. And is that how you felt? Or, I'm hearing you say that, and I can only imagine the learning that you developed as a result of that. And so being in that space with somebody, it is a privilege, and it's something I don't take lightly, and it's very sacred. But as far as like if there have been times that it stuck to me, yeah, there have. And being able to recognize when it does is important, but it highlights an area of growth. So I remember there was a client years ago, this was earlier on in my training or licensure, and I had an older adolescent boy who was going through something with the family in his family dynamic. And I just remember feeling like the only person between this adolescent and everything that was up against him. And I felt responsible. And the job that I had, like if the phone rang at midnight, like because it would, you have to keep your phone on. You didn't know what was going to happen in this particular case. Were they calling because there was, a physical fight, or they got kicked out of the house, or they were on the street? And so I remember being anxious back then about like, what if something happens to this child? And I'm the only one who knows. And I'm the only one that they have spoken to about this thing. And no one's hearing him, and no one's hearing me about what I'm saying, what's going on.
Right.
And so taking that home, it was hard to sleep at night because I didn't know if the phone was going to ring and I was going to miss the call. So recognizing that is like, okay, but I think recognizing that like early on, like, okay, this is a manifestation of my own sense of like responsibility for other people. And there's something sticky here that within me that this is sticking to. And also how can I use that, right? I can say exactly that to this child. What I hear, what's happening is that you're screaming out for help and nobody's hearing and nobody's paying attention, but I'm here and I'm listening and you do matter. So using what was coming up for me was a way to connect with him, was a way for him to see his own worth when nobody else did. So that was, I think, one of the most hard experiences that I had because it was early on and so scary. But being able to make that shift to help this kid, I still look back on that.
Yeah. No, that's an intense experience, and I can only imagine it may have been one of the first, but it definitely won't be one of the last that you deal with, and I think that that was such a great intuitive way to reach out to that child by you recognized ahead of time, "Oh, wow, they're dealing with this, this, and this. I know that if they don't address it, it's gonna turn into that negative script of, 'I'm not worthy, I'm not enough,' or 'I did something bad and I deserve to be treated this way.'" And so by having you in their life, they luckily and hopefully were able to, nip that nip that comment in the bud early and recognize that, okay, that's not true. That negative script I'm using and repeating in my life is actually not it's not true, it's not useful, and it won't help me get anywhere or recover from this. So I think that that was wonderful that you were able to relate and connect with that child without fully losing yourself in the process at the same time. Like that's so key. I'm curious, since you kind of have brought up those relationships and it may have affected you too. How does your work and life balance work out? I know with your partner and you have a child that has special needs. Like, how has your relationships at home been affected by the work that you do, or are you actually really good at keeping it like this is at work, this is at home, kind of separate kind of things? Because I'm really curious, how your journey as a mother has impacted you and how you've kind of dealt with that with your partner with having a special needs child and what you've learned from that process.
That's a really great question. So certain things I can definitely separate. When I'm not working, I need to be just a person with my own stuff. And so when it comes to work, I really try to work in pockets of time, right? I think where it gets a little blurry is in the admin stuff of running the practice because those things have to get done. And sometimes there's only certain times to do it that would be in my personal time because it's a lot. But there are certain things I think that are just a part of my nature, and it's not about like separating it. And it's always helped me to be able to not take on everybody's stuff, which is like recognizing what I'm feeling when I'm feeling it and how much of this does belong to me and how much of it doesn't. That's just kind of my way of being in the world because I do feel emotion. Sometimes just even I can pick up on other people's emotions intuitively, I think, but I can't necessarily shut that off, but that's why my quiet time or listening to and watching, media that makes me laugh and provides me with relief and being around people that make me happy and provide a sense of comfort are so important. So that I can't necessarily turn off, but in terms because that's part of who I am, but in terms of like, therapy brain, that's when I'm not working with a client or doing something for work, I am I'm just I'm me. And we wear all these different hats and different facets of our lives. And I do like that in other endeavors that I do, I get to just like work on making sure that's separate.
No, good. Yeah, no, that sounds like you've got a good balance with that and a good responsibility where you're not leaving your business hanging, but you're still getting what you need done on the professional side and the personal side. What would you say is your favorite thing about being a mom?
Favorite thing. Seeing the little, I don't want to say little, but watching his growth for us. And I think for many parents of special needs children, the milestones look different and they could be very small or they could be, but really they're very huge. And they're things that we've been working on for months and months and months and years and years and years, or they're things that generally speaking come naturally or supposed to come naturally. So when that happens, it's life changing. When like I'll never forget when my son participated on his own in a conversation that was happening in front of him for the first time, like just contributed to the conversation. That was such a big thing, that it stopped me in my tracks. I don't think it's ever something that I'll ever get over or forget. And even the first time he ever spoke a word, we didn't know if he would speak. It was one of my biggest fears. And so when he did, yeah, it was amazing. And then, because I think another thing about being a special needs parent or parent in general, I don't want to say just special needs, but I think we're always wondering, am I doing enough? Am I doing a good job? And so seeing those things that, are working, even if most of the time it feels like I don't know what I'm doing, those are, I think, uh, really rewarding. And seeing him grow up and change and develop into his own little person, those are things. Or, when they say something really funny, where did you even get that from?
I love that. And I think that's a fabulous answer, getting to see him blossom. And how old is your son?
He's 4, he's gonna be 5 soon.
4. How exciting. That's such a fun age, though, because I'm sure with your therapy background, it probably helps because you can, like, help him with emotions and just figuring out how to best express himself given the tools that he has available. And so I think it's so cool because you also get to see the world through his eyes, right? As he's that little and experiencing things for the first time and trying new stuff or new new skills, and it's got to be such a fun time to see him really grow into being a tiny human. That's great.
I'm not gonna lie. I mean, yes, this is where like, work-life balance I think comes into play. It's like I'm definitely a human, right? So like, you know, I would say that in a lot of ways it's harder to carry on those therapy things and what I know to be true. I think in some ways I know too much, right? Like
Sure.
I could definitely get a little fearful or anxious at times. So in some ways it's where I take my therapy hat off and have my work life balance. Is like I'm not his therapist for mental health. Like that's where I know. Right, I'm his mom. When it comes to, like, speech or occupational therapy or physical therapy, like, I'm all for, like, I can do that with you. But when it comes to the mental health piece, that's too much for me to take on alone. Like, I know I need help with that. And I say that just to humanize, like, I'm just a person too trying to make it.
That's a good idea too. Like, it's a fine line, but you're right. As your son gets older, he deserves a certain level of privacy, and so do you. And so you being his therapist would definitely become a conflict of interest. So I think you're totally in the right to not cross that certain boundary.
It's
And
just too close.
yeah, it's a little too close. Like, he deserves to have secrets. He deserves to have a private conversation with someone if he wants to say it. So you're 100%, I think, in the right there. And I think that that's just, it's really cool that you're getting to watch him grow and change and learn right in front of your eyes. And I think that that's probably many parents find joy in that. So that's wonderful. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. We've reached our hour, but I typically have so many questions, but I've had so much fun chatting with you. So this was fabulous for me. I feel like I've learned a whole lot, and I might sign up for the practice one day. Be like, I think this would really help me out.
Uh,
So it's so exciting. So I'm so glad you came on the show. The one final question I have, since the show is based on, feeling lost and uncertain with your life and kind of where you're at in the world and you're trying to find your place or your purpose, I'm curious. The final question I have is, what would you say to somebody listening right now who is going through a season of self-loss, grief, and uncertainty, and they know they need to make a change in their life, but they're not really sure what direction to go in? What would your advice be?
so having been someone who's felt that way as well, what I will say is follow what you love and follow what makes you happy, even if it's the tiniest little thing that gets you out of the house or out of your head and into the moment. So maybe it's a matter of like, instead of dragging yourself to the gym for the umpteenth time, maybe you go for a walk because that feels better, right? If your whole life have been told you need to go into finance, but it doesn't feel right, like what does? You're never going to go wrong if do something that interests you or excites you. And I think the argument to that is, well, I don't have the ability, I don't have the time, I don't have. Do it in doses. Do it in those little pockets of time. And just make the little pockets of time that maybe you're scrolling social media, and it could just be a matter of calling someone who puts a smile on your face and asking them about their day. So the little spots of time when you think that you don't have, swap it out for something that does need you.
Yeah, I love that. And it's such a heavy thing to carry, trying to figure out how to not be in that mental headspace anymore. But I think this interview has been fabulous and offered so many great insights and different perspectives, the different ways to think about what it is you're saying and doing when you're feeling that way, and how to help you not hate yourself for being lost. I pointed so much of that negative thought back onto me, and it perpetuated that feeling for much, much longer than it necessarily needed to. So I'm so glad that we were able to chat with you and learn how to flip those scripts or flip those negative thoughts and ideas. So this has been absolutely fabulous. I'm so glad you came on the show. Alyssa, please let everybody know if they want to work with you or find you. What's the best way to connect or engage with your therapy practice and the content that you're doing and producing and putting out into the world?
Yeah. So the best way to reach us is on our website. We've got a lot of resources there, a lot of blog posts that are backed by clinical research and things like that. We often will announce our workshops on our website as well. And we'll do pop-ups that allow you to sign up for alerts. But the best way to reach us is our website, and you can find us online at www.collective-therapy.com.
Excellent. Oh, thank you so much. This has been the best. Everybody, I will put all of Alyssa's information into the description box or the show notes of this episode. Remember to like, subscribe, leave a review. Let us know what you thought of today's convo. I hope it was helpful. And don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a review. Let us know what you think of the episode on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. You can leave direct comments on the Spotify episodes. You can leave your 5-star reviews with Apple. Hit us up on the YouTube channel. I can't wait to hear from each and every one of you. And remember, wanderers are always welcome.